Hey guys, so this video essay is sort of a background understanding for the text we're going to study in class, which is Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And I think this background understanding of the text is just going to make things a bit more easier for us as we go ahead with the poem. And this is an excellent poem written by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who at a time really had a difficult shift in his personal life because this poem is actually an homage, if I may also add, for the lack of better words, for his best friend Arthur Hallam. Arthur Hallam and Alfred Tennyson met in Trinity College and they became best friends. Hallam often and mostly always supported his desires for art, and in literary spaces he knew that Alfred Tennyson would really shine in life. And their connection even deepens when we know that Arthur Hallam was actually in a very deep, profound romantic relationship with his sister Emilia. And you could find some texts online where you'd read their poetry where they had written it together. You'd find that. However, unfortunately, Arthur Hallam passed away at the age of 21 due to cerebral hemorrhage. And when he was writing a poem in honor of his best friend, he really didn't know what to do. And often we know that, we would expect um, an elegy or a poem that's thematically very mourning, but that's not what we really find in Ulysses at all. Even though Helen's death sort of left him devastated, and so instead of writing such a mournful poem, um, he moves forward and writes a poem about Ulysses, which is the Roman term for Odyssey, who is a speaker in the poem who definitely refuses to stop living in the moment of what he's doing, and he wants to go beyond that. He wants to, flow against the river tides, and he wants to embark in an endless journey. So, of course, this is completely disconnected with what he's feeling. And we would probably never know why he would want to approach this method of writing when he's mourning, but you'd also find him saying most of the times of many things he had published, this was one of those that's something very memorable to him because, he's pressing forward despite the loss that he's feeling. And that's kind of like an understanding that I personally believe I have. And, Alfred Tennyson himself wasn't such a wanderlust traveler, by the way, because his narrative definitely shows that he's really upward, up and forward towards traveling. But he was very homebound, very because his journeys were more intellectual and emotional. And this poem, I think, would be a better fit because while this is a traveling poem, you wouldn't really see Alfred Tennyson traveling too much. But we can also find that there is a lot of personal crisis. And at the time when he was, writing this poem and then publishing this poem, was published in 1842, by the way. But then he had written this, years earlier. And in his 20s and 30s, Tennyson went through a lot of financial crisis because his father had passed away and he had gone through a lot of family struggles and career doubts as well. And because he had no stable job, he would often rely on allowances provided by the relatives. And his writing often, and this is the part where I think it motivates me quite a lot personally, particularly because of a big part and chunk of his life, much of his poetry publications were denied because, Victorian critics who believed in rationalism, who believed in, understanding literature through the lens of politics and society, believed that he was too sentimental and very obscure and very emotional. His writing were filled with a lot of personal sentiments and lush. So I think what I would like to add to this is because I believe his writing was caught in between Romantic period and Victorian didactism, both at the same time. Something that you could also, when we read Dover Beach, we could also find in Matthew Arnold himself. Like I've mentioned before, in different generations, different problems occur, different kinds of renditions of life occur. Because, Victorian England, there was a rise of democracy and there was a rift between the higher classes and lower classes, even though there was also an establishment of the middle classes having proper trade unions. Despite all of this, there was a strict moral code. And many often critiqued the exploitation of, colonial expansion that England was doing during the reign or regime of Queen Victoria. We can find the rise of socialism in the political history as well. Because colonial ideas, when they come into power, we can't definitely think that everyone is in support of colonialism. That's definitely not the case, because we find romantic poets becoming quite effectively uh, towards or drawn towards the narrative uh, of a liberal stage of livelihood where, free will truly exists. And I think the connection between Tennyson and his best friend, Hallam, speaks volumes on how literary spaces truly are, friendship truly is. And even though the text that we're going to study is going to talk about adventure moving forward, I kind of want you to wonder why Tennyson had written definitely not about his best friend directly, and he completely focuses his narrative towards Odyssey or Ulysses, right? And why does he do so? Does he want to move forward despite all the convictions that he feels in life and all the stages that he feels as if life stays very stagnant? Does he want to move beyond this stage of life? Because he has all these hurdles in his life, and despite all of this, he moves forward. And I want to add this as well. Even at a time, he didn't publish for a decade. And, Victorian critics often almost forgot about him. His existence became absent until in 1850, around the 1850s, he had, won the poem laureate. And, because of the passing of William Wordsworth and the denial of Samuel Rogers, we find the next best suited candidate would be Alfred Tennyson. And we call him Alfred Lord Tennyson because in 1884, Queen Victoria granted him a baron for his services in poetry. That's why he was a Baron Tennyson, and so he had been known to be a Baron Tennyson of Aldworth and Freshwater, and that's why we call him Alfred Lord Tennyson and not Lord Alfred Tennyson, because he wasn't born to royalty and monarchy. He was, you know, provided that title himself. Now, when we're going to study about Ulysses, there are a lot of information that I want you to sort of understand beforehand, because this is going to be very interesting, right? Who is Ulysses? Who is Odyssey? If you're very much interested in Greek literature, Greek history, uh, I think you'd really like it. I think you'd very much enjoy it. Uh, you know, because when we look into the understanding of Greek literature and Greek history, we go beyond understanding what bravery is, but we move ahead and look into various epics and understanding of Greek history and Greek literature, which is a lot rich with very complex human relationships. And beyond that, we find that, God and goddesses have a more humanistic approach. And this is what I've, discussed about before with you as well. But who is this Odyssey? By the way, I found this artwork in Divine's art. Do follow the artist if you can. I'll share the name of this artist or the handle of their art of the artist. They're doing a tremendously good job in representing these characters from Greek literature. So Ulysses is Odyssey. Odyssey is Ulysses. It's the Roman or Latin term for Odysseus. So you would find Ulysses in various texts, but mostly he's known for, and the reference mainly comes from the Iliad written by Homer. And when you read about it, you'll notice there are very interesting factors about Homer's Odyssey. Because what does Homer's Odyssey really tell us? This is something very important for us to understand because Odysseus is the mastermind actually behind the Trojan horse. And Tennyson chose the Roman name, but after Odysseus, he rules the kingdom Ithaca. And for 20 years, he was away in the Trojan War. And after he came back, he realizes that his son had, grown old. And, his wife, Penelope, is all by herself waiting for the king, which is Odysseus. But with many events, we sort of find out that, Penelope has a lot of suitors because people believed that Odysseus had passed away in the war. And what happens in the text, we find that Homer sort of mentions that with the time with his son Telemachus, who is now old enough to, reign over the kingdom, Odysseus and Telemachus both together, um, with a series of events, he and his son drive all the suitors away. And in this epic, we see a storyline. And this storyline really doesn't end because in epics, we usually know that there is a birth of a hero, the rise of the hero, and the fall of the hero, or having a conclusive end of the hero. But we don't really find that here. However, you'd find in Dante's Inferno. In Dante's Inferno, we find a reference of Odyssey in a very different lens as well. And what is sort of the idea that we find? Well, in Homer, we find Ulysses and his son Telemachus both sort of driving away all suitors, right? For Penelope. But on the other hand, what we notice in Dante's reference in the Divine of Comedy in the 26th cantos, we find that there is actually an end to Ulysses of what had happened to him afterwards. In the 26th canto, we find a different version of it altogether. Interestingly, in this version right over here, Dante sort of places Odyssey in the eighth circle of hell amongst the all false sort of concealers. But he was told to, after driving away all of the suitors, he is actually to go on a journey by ship and to travel. He's to travel to the ends of means and to different places. He's going to travel and sort of find out the truth of what it is. And all of those sort of kind of brings in the idea of an aging adventurer. And we find in Dante's cantos, in the 26th cantos, we find that Ulysses gives a very dramatic speech explaining how, after returning from Troy, he could not resist the lure of adventure, and instead of settling down, he sort of sailed towards what we know as the Pillars of Hercules. And this is very close in spirit to Tennyson. So what had Tennyson done is he reimagined the position of Ulysses, where he takes the references from Dante and from Homer both at the same time and juxtaposes that idea. And we find Ulysses, the speaker, who's absolutely tired of sort of going back to kingdom and, controlling an entire empire. He no longer wants that. He no longer desires that kind of life. And what he wants to do is go on unending adventures where he will receive and understand different kinds of knowledge that people often find unattainable. And in the poem, you'll find that there's a lot of reference to the, sinking stars, to the end of the time, because he wants to travel. He has this thirst for traveling. And we are drawing that reference from Dante's Inferno quite definitely. And in the poem, we'll try to understand why he has such a thirst for knowledge, or what is it about this urgency where he wants to travel. And I think that's what's very important because in this poem, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I want you to read it because in the last line of the poem, it says, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Is it only about the death of his best friend, or perhaps more emotions that he had, or the poet originally had felt? And can he really connect more to the Odysseus or Ulysses in Dante's Inferno as opposed to Homer's The Iliad's Odysseus? So that's what we're sort of working with. Uh, so I want you to read the poem. And after reading the poem, I hope if you have any questions, you can definitely ask me. I'll see you in class.